All right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, welcome. It's so nice to see this many faces today. Oof. This is pretty exciting. Honestly, I don't think we had this many people here since probably Hanukkah was the last time we had this many people here. So that's pretty cool. So anyways, we have a special Refugee Shabbat. This has been organized nationally by Highest. And so we have a guest speaker who I'll introduce later in the service. But for now, I'm going to invite Emmy and Rifki and Shale up here to light the Shabbat candles.
I like the match you guys like each light a candle.
Ooh. We're on page 120 of the prayer books, by the way. Thank you so much, you three. Okay, we continue now on page 128 of our prayer books. For Hine Matov, where is 128? I'm going to invite the Mitra brothers to lead us in it.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.
Lechadoji on 138, we're going to recite paragraphs, is it 1, 2, 5, and 9?
1, 2, 5.
Okay, 1, 2, 5, and 9, and we arrive on paragraph 9. We're all going to stand up and face the entrance.
It's actually 1, 5.
Oh, sorry, I'm 159. 159. We're going to recite paragraph 159, and then at paragraph 9, we're going to stand up and we're going to greet the Shabbat bride, and anyone that's late, we can feel bad with staring right into their eyes, okay? Let's do it.
לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. 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 שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשמו תפארת ולתהילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך ומאורי, אורי אורי שידברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. לך דודי לקבלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. בואי ושלום, עטרת בלה, גם בשמחה ובצולה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי כלה, בואי כלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה.
You may be seated. Shalom Aleichem? Okay, Shalom Aleichem, page 142.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bochem Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bakuni leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzidkim leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
All right, we now move to page 144, the Chatzi Kaddish. You know, I find myself reciting like a new prayer these days. It's will my car make it through the snow pothole prayer. I feel like I should like compose one like for real as like a Alaska rabbi. So I'll figure that out and get back to you all what I come up with. But that's, anyways, thinking about just the Chatzi Kaddish, thinking about that. Here we go. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabba be'elma divrach yotev yamlik malchutei b'chayechon u'byomechon u'chayerechol beit Yisrael ba'gala uvizman kariv v'imaru amen. Yehesh me rabba mevarach le'alam ulal me'almayam yitbarach v'yishtabak v'yitpa'ar v'yipromam v'yitnasem v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudasha barechu le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'almam v'ru amen. We move into the Baruch Hu on page 146, our call for prayer. And when you arrive there, I invite you to stand with us.
La 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Baruch hu et Adonai.
You may be seated. We move now to page 148 from Ma'ariv Aravim.
Umavir yom, umavir yom, umavir yom, umavir laila, umavir ben yom uven laila, Adonai tzvot shemo, el chai v'kayam, tamidim lo, aleinu le'olam vayeh, Baruch atah Adonai, hamariv aravim. Umavir yom, umavir laila, umavir ben yom uven laila, Adonai tzvot shemo, el chai v'kayam, tamidim lo, aleinu le'olam vayeh, Baruch atah Adonai, hamariv aravim. Ya la la la, 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 ya la la.
We now continue on page 151. I would like for us to read in the English together the bottom paragraph of that page. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol. All these things your Torah gives to us. And the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiest of your works and the living language that gives it form? Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. For the Shema this evening, we're going to recite together as a community. Then we'll say Baruch Shem to ourselves, and then we'll sit for a few moments of silent meditation and reflection before we move into the V'ahavta. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kivod Malachuto Leolam Vaed. Page 154. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol avacha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meyodecha v'hayu hadevarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinartam levarnecha b'divartam ba'am B'shivtecha b'veitecha, u'b'techa ha'vaderech, u'shofbecha u'vkumecha, u'kshartam le'yot al yadecha, v'hayu l'totafot b'neinecha,
Uktavtam al mezuzot betecha uvisharecha Laman tizkeru v'asitem echol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim leiloechem Ani Adonai Elohechem Asher hotzeti etchem meretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim Ani Adonai Elohechem. Micha Mocha on page 158.
Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la.
On page 162.
Veshamru v'nei Israel et HaShabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. בני יומים, בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
We now move into the Amidah on page 164. When you arrive there, I invite you to stand with us.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yadi tehilatecha. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yadi tehilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu V'Imotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, El HaGadol, HaGibor, HaNorah, El Elyon, Gomel
ילדים טובים וקוני הכל וזכר חסדי אבות ואימהות ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך חוזר ומשיח ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם עזרא שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני וחיי הכל אתה רב ויושיע משיב הרוח ומרעיב הגשם מקלקל חיים בחסד וחיי הכל ברחמים רבים סומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשני עבר מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומדומה לה מלך מנהיג ומחיה ומסמיך ישועה ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל ברוך אתה אדוני מחיה הכל. We're now going to continue silently until page 180. You may be seated whenever you like.
Ose shalom bimroma, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Israel, vimru amen. Ose shalom bimroma, Yase shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel vimru amen. Yase shalom shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel Yase shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel. Yase shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel. Yase shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael.
Okay, it's a great pleasure to invite Isa up here for our Refugee Shabbat. And Isa, you're allowed to take your mask off once you're on the demo, okay? Let's put mine on.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks for welcoming me. And thanks to HIAS for hosting this. I'm Mrs. Patrasano. I'm the state refugee coordinator here in the state of Alaska. I work at Catholic Social Services Refugee Assistance and Immigration Services Program. We're the only refugee resettlement program here in the state of Alaska. That's got its challenges. You all are from here. That means we cover the whole state. And so while the majority of our clients do live here in Anchorage, refugees live across the state in a variety of different communities. And so about 80% of people live here in Anchorage. And then we have populations, a pretty big group of population in Wasilla. And then we actually have refugees in Delta Junction. That's actually why we exist. In the late 90s, a group of refugees moved to the city of Delta, well, I shouldn't say city, the small town of Delta Junction. And the federal government was like, who's there to help them? And there was no refugee resettlement program, thus beginning the process for Catholic Social Services to start one. And we've been actively welcoming refugees to the state of Alaska since 2003. I've been working in refugee resettlement services for about 10 years. I started my career here in Alaska and worked directly, mostly at that time with education and employment services, was here for 6 years, and then actually moved to Kansas City. And I worked at Jewish Vocational Services under the HIAS. There's a number of different VOLEGs that coordinate refugee resettlement. So I worked at Jewish Vocational Services for a year in Kansas City, welcoming refugees to that community, and then moved back to Alaska in 2018 to be the coordinator here in Alaska. And so there's a lot going on in our world right now, in the world we all share actually, that affects global displacement. And I would like to think that at some point, what I do as a career is not going to be needed. But I think humanity has taught us over time that there are always going to be people fleeing violence, persecution, and other things. And that, you know, part of our responsibility, I believe our responsibility is to welcome that person from those violent situations and give them opportunity at a new chance at life. And that's really what Refugee Services does here in the state of Alaska every day. You know, there's a lot of conflicts that are going on right now, just a global refugee picture. You know, there's 26.4 million people that have refugee status. And that was before the conflict in Afghanistan, and that was before Ukraine. So what number are we going to see by next year? I have to imagine that that number is going to be on the rise to close to 28 million, probably by the end of next year. The United States has gone through, and I should also mention that within that number of refugee numbers, there's another group we called IDPs, internally displaced persons. There are nearly 45 million internally displaced people who are within the borders of their own country, but not where they are from. So that's happening in the Ukraine right now. How many people are from Kiev who are now, you know, in a different community? So they've really lost everything as they flee violence in what has been their home. And so they're not refugees yet because they haven't left their country, but the IDP number tells us a lot about the future of what the world will look like for refugees, right? And then we have the last thing that we look at in global displacement, which is asylum. And, you know, there are about 10 million pending asylee applications across the globe right now. The US alone has over 800,000 open asylum cases of people waiting to determine if they're going to receive asylum status to be able to stay here. And so, you know, if you look at all of that, the statistic I just heard this last weekend is that 1 in every 112 people in the world are globally displaced in some way. Right? I mean, that's unbelievable to even think about. For me, I was sitting in a room with 350 people when they said that. And that meant three of us are displaced in our lifetime, right? And so the work that we do to welcome refugees with the, you know, through the federal program is really about like making a very, very small, but I believe meaningful dent in that large global number. It's about offering people the opportunity to come here and restart their lives. And the Refugee Resettlement Program in the United States is over 40 years old. It was established officially in 1980. But of course, the roots of the Refugee Resettlement Program are near and dear to probably most of your hearts because the United Nations High Commissioner met and developed the National Human Rights, like information about what the rights of a human are, and created refugee statuses as a result of the Holocaust in World War II, where the globe came together and said, we need some formal way to establish when a person has the legal right to flee persecution and violence, and thus should have legal protections in that secondary country, right? And so this is not new, but unfortunately, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And so where are we today? Just some local context. And in the last 5 years, resettlement has been greatly affected by two things: the previous administration and COVID. Historically, Alaska resettled about 130 people a year, and in the last 4 or 5 years, we have not come anywhere close to those numbers. Nobody has across the nation. The numbers have dropped drastically. The historic average for refugee resettlement across the United States is 95,000 cases a year. In the last year of the Trump administration, only about 20,000 cases came, and last year only 11,000 people came. And if I go back to what the global number is, 26.4 million, and we're making a dent of 20,000 or 11,000, that's almost next to nothing. There are over 20 countries that do participate in the refugee resettlement program globally, though. But still, in a total number in the last few years, you're talking about 300,000 people, right? And so it really is such a small number to what the global stage is. The exact opposite is currently happening. With the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the federal government, as many of you probably saw, flew out nearly 110,000 people on evacuation flights. 75,000 of those people were granted status to be able to be resettled here through the refugee resettlement programs. And so since basically October until now, 75,000 people have been resettled. So we went from a network of resettlement agencies last year that resettled 11,000 people to resettling 75,000 people basically in 3 or 4 months. That's the greatest undertaking I would say that's ever occurred in refugee resettlement in such a short period of time. Here in Alaska, we've resettled 112 Afghans. In total, I've enrolled 124 people in this fiscal year. And so my fiscal year starts October 1st because that's the federal fiscal year. So in the beginning of just this half of this year alone, we're almost at our historic average, and we will well exceed this will probably be the largest year for refugee arrivals in the history of the refugee program here in the state of Alaska. So we are expecting more cases, certainly. This year, we've enrolled cases from Afghanistan, Sudan, South Sudan, Ukraine, Somalia. We just had a Somali walk-in case. And so we anticipate more cases, certainly from Afghanistan, as more people are yet to depart that area, especially family reunifications. Clearly, we expect more cases from the Ukraine. It takes time. It's not an automatic flight. And then you get here. The average wait period for a refugee is 14 to 17 years that they're displaced in a secondary or third country before being allowed to resettle to their permanent location. So it's a lengthy process. But we certainly expect family reunification cases for our Ukrainians. We have some open pending cases that we're actually about to fly, and flights are getting canceled because of the no-fly zones over the Ukraine and Russia as people flee. And once they get to Poland, Warsaw, or Moldova, those cases will be rebooked. So the work we do doesn't happen without the community. I want to say that. The staff, while we helped resettle just such a large number of people so very quickly, what did that mean? We could have never done that alone. I mean, we set up over 40 apartments, and all of you have moved. It's the worst thing in the world, right? No one wants to move. It's absolutely awful. You have to carry furniture. You have to set up things. You have to empty boxes. You have to load cabinets. If I had done that alone with my staff, there is no way I would have housed that many people successfully or been able to do that with success. So we had a huge outpouring of community support. Doing moving teams. People showed up with trucks. They carried the furniture upstairs. They put pots and pans in the shelves. They put welcome notes on people's tables. So when they got there, it wasn't just me welcoming them. It was Anchorage welcoming them. It was the state of Alaska welcoming them. You know, there was actually a spice company in Juneau that sent us spices, traditional spices from Afghanistan, so that every home could have these traditional spices. So when they got there, it tasted like home, right? We had members of the community. There's a halal market in town. The halal market cooked hot food for every new arrival. So we called them and said, hey, this family's coming. They cooked hot, fresh halal meals so that we could pick them up. So when you got off an airplane and we took you to your apartment for the first time after being displaced for, 6-7 months in a military installment, after being evacuated out of Afghanistan, you walked into your home, you saw a hot meal on the table, and you got to sleep in your own beds that were set up by the community. And your fridge was full of groceries that were donated by the community. You don't qualify for food stamps yet, right? It takes 4 or 5 weeks to get your food stamps set up. So who fed them for those 4 or 5 weeks? The community did, through what we call meals teams. It's just somebody, we send out an email and say, we need food, and somebody brings it for us, right? And that's just a really practical way to help welcome in ways that help us do our job, help them get set up with employment and services and other things. While my staff can do that, it allows us to make sure the basic needs that people need are met. And so in the beginning of this year alone, I just pulled data out of our database, which of course I work for the federal government. They care a lot about data. So I'm always looking at the data. We've distributed over $110,000 worth of in-kind to those families, right? And those couches and those mattresses and those pots and pans, they didn't come from me. They came from the community of Alaska, who showed up and mailed stuff from Amazon and donated items to our office. And that makes a difference, because all of us know what it is to have a home, right? And a home is not just a roof over your head. It's a place that actually feels warm and welcoming and has things in it. So when you open a cabinet, you know, it's got the cup that you need to drink the tea in the morning that you're used to drinking, right? And so it's things, but they're not things. They're not things when you've lost everything and you finally have a place to call home again. And so all the work that the community does in cooperation with us is really meaningful and important. So I could talk a lot about a lot of things. I necessarily won't do that. I think I can take questions, and I usually find that people have questions. And so if nobody has questions, I'll keep rambling at you, but I won't necessarily do that unless you want me to. So I'd be happy to answer a question if someone has one. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, the question was, what are the concrete steps someone who's interested in volunteering can take for someone who's newly resettled or has been resettled to Anchorage? So the very first thing you can do is you can go to the cssalaska.org website, and there's a volunteer application link. And you go there and you're going to fill out a volunteer application. There are a number of ways you can volunteer. It can be as simple, like I said, about bringing food or moving furniture, all the way to much more meaningful things. We have what's called family mentors. Family mentors are matched with a new family, and basically you get to do the cool things I don't get to do. You get to be their friend. You get to show them how to ski in the winter. You get to take them up to Flat Top. You get to take them to the Anchorage Museum. All you are is a friendly face that gets to go to their home, eat dinner with them. You know, it makes a difference when you have someone who's in this community that says, like, yeah, I want to get to know you. I want to help you. And so we're not asking you to be their case manager. I'm just asking you to be their friend. So that's one thing people can do. We also have a number of other grants that one of them is called Youth Mentoring. And this is really a grant that focuses on refugees that arrive between the ages of 15 to 24. A lot of them, you know, if you come here at 15, 16, 17, it's really hard to graduate from high school. You don't have enough credits coming from your home country because you likely haven't been in school, right? And so you get here, and it's really important to graduate from high school when we think about the longevity of people's success in life in the United States, right? Access to jobs and other things are going to happen at a higher rate if you can graduate from high school. We also know if we can get people into job training programs or into GED classes in that 18 to 24 range, the likelihood that they're going to have better success, right, in employment and other things happen. So there's this program called Youth Mentoring. And so you can sign up for that, and we'll match you with a youth. And it's kind of like, you know, maybe you're going to go over there and help them with math, or you're going to go over and help them with English class. But again, it's about just assisting them in the process. So their parents might not be aware. We have a number of youth graduating. They got to fill out their FAFSA. Their parents don't know what a FAFSA is, but you might know what a FAFSA is because you went to college. So can you help them sit and fill out the FAFSA, take them over to UAA and show them what it looks like, right? Give them an opportunity to kind of navigate those pathways. Again, not to be the sole person. The staff is going to help you with that, but to be that like encouraging voice or encouraging hand. When you come to the United States, you are on a pathway to citizenship, which is great, but you have to become a citizen. And if you do not, you lose your benefits after 7 years. This is extremely challenging for older refugees who come. So say you come at the age of 65, you need to learn English. You need to read, write, and speak it to pass the citizenship test. If you don't, you get kicked off of SSI at the age of 72. It's really challenging, right? I mean, that's a serious problem. So we have an older refugee grant. We need volunteers that are willing to teach citizenship class. So there's a number of ways you can get involved, all the way from like simply just dropping off food one time to like, I really want to get matched with a family, get to know them. If you fill out a volunteer application, we have someone in our office that coordinates that service and can reach out to you and kind of figure out what it is you're interested in doing. They can go in much more detail about what we do. If anyone's ever been to Grow North Farm, if you haven't, it's the largest urban farm in Anchorage. That's operated by us in cooperation with Anchorage Community Land Trust. We need people to come out to the farm, right? Like farm work day, like, you know, someone's got to help move all that soil. But also we have people that just come to the farm and meet with the clients and help them. You know, they work a 2-hour shift once a week. So again, that's another way to get involved and get to know the communities that we serve. Yeah.
So what is the typical
Yeah, what's the typical trajectory for refugees here in Anchorage? I mean, refugees overwhelmingly are very successful here, is what I would say. And yeah, I'll give you an example. So I can tell you that there's a couple things our office does to track what success looks like, right? The federal government tells me to track employment. That's one way of viewing success, self-sufficiency. We do track that. I can tell you we're quite successful. We just had a staff meeting today. In employment statistics, for example, of all those Afghans that have arrived, 1/2 of the adults are already employed and working. And they came October, November, December, January, February. So, you know, like no one's been here greater than 5 months, and over 1/2 of them are already employed. The average wage that people are making is around $15 an hour in that employment, and 88% of people who are matched into full-time jobs have health benefits offered. So those are the kind of statistics we track to try to figure out how people are faring. But there's only a little bit that employment tells us. It doesn't actually tell us how someone is doing, right? So we also have something in our agency that we administer called the Raise Quality of Life Scale. And this is where we look at your community integration. This is where we look at your health and well-being, your mental health, how your children are doing in school. And we do that at intake 6 months and 1 year. And that really helps us try to figure out what services or supports people need that are greater, that they can be matched to. And, you know, I can just say this, like in our experience, Alaska is a good place to live because it's welcoming and it gives you a shot. You know, people have good opportunities here, and we see that all the time with refugee communities. And our very first Burmese case that ever arrived to Alaska just came by the office 2 weeks ago and brought like a whole bunch of food to us. And they've been here like 10 years. And I was like, what are you doing here? Why are you bringing food? They said, we just bought a restaurant. We're owners, we're business owners. And they had owned another business and sold that business to buy this restaurant. You know, and another family that I just saw, they've been here 2.5 years. They just bought a house, you know, like people are excelling and they're doing very well over time. You know, not everybody I think is like blowing it out of the park, you know, but we do see people, you know, like make a home here and settle in and do very well. And so do a lot of people end up in the jobs they were in when they started? No. I mean, there is a loss of status that comes with being a refugee. The very first refugee that was ever resettled to Alaska as a free case, meaning they didn't have any family ties here. They just came. They just like randomly were assigned to the state of Alaska. She was from Uzbekistan, spoke no English when she got here, but had been a medical doctor in Uzbekistan. And so, you know, her opportunity to become a doctor here was like non-existent, right? You'd have to re-go through medical school, which she wasn't going to do. But I can tell you, she's worked at the refugee program for the last 12 years. And I think for her, that's a success. You know, she's giving back to the community and to the agency that helped her. And yeah, she just celebrated 12 years on staff. And so I think success looks varied and different, but we try to track to the best of our ability, you know, the things that we can then manageably try to implement or put into programming to improve people's lives. Yeah.
So you mentioned that they are 7 years to pass the citizenship test, but I don't think all of them are allowed to be on a citizenship track. So I'm curious, because I know this problem with the Afghan refugees. And which groups get to be on that track and which are sort of left behind?
Yeah, so the question is really about who's eligible for citizenship, who's not. Is it refugees? Is it other populations? Because Afghans aren't. You are correct. So the vast majority of people who are resettled by us come with what's called refugee status. Okay. If you have refugee status, you are on a pathway to citizenship. On the day you arrive, you have the legal right to work when you get here. At 1 year, you become a green card holder, a permanent resident, you're eligible. And then at 5 years, you can apply for citizenship. That's true for people who also have asylum. We also serve people who have asylum in my office. Now, Afghans are a little bit different because the speed at which it occurred in Afghanistan and the urgency to get people out of Afghanistan, the administration put people on flights and departed them not as refugees. They arrived as what's called, and this is a bad term, and I don't like the term, but it is the immigration term, so I'm going to say it, Humanitarian Parolees. So it's called Humanitarian Parolee. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with prison. They're not felons, like they've done nothing wrong. It's an immigration term that basically means that you are on temporary status to stay here. The government didn't give them permanency, right? They said you can come because humanitarian parolee is a law, is a part of our immigration law that allows for, in an emergency situation, when no other option is available, to grant people temporary status to come, right? So most of the Afghans were offered 2 years of humanitarian parolee status. Then Congress enacted a law on October 1st that said your pathway to stay is that you must apply for asylum, go through immigration court here, and make a determination of whether you can legally stay. This is a real problem because I told you there's already 800,000 people with pending asylum applications. The closest asylee office to the state of Alaska is in San Francisco. It's really complicated. They'd have to take a circuit ride to come up here and do interviews. There are not enough immigration attorneys, frankly, in Alaska or across the country to even process that many asylum cases. So yes, there is currently, hopefully, Congress is going to pass what's called the Afghan Adjustment Act. I highly encourage you to reach out to your senators and encourage them to pass this. And that will allow all those Afghans to just apply for green cards and on a pathway to permanent residency instead of having to go through the process of asylum. So most of the time, this is totally unusual. Most of the cases we resettle are on a pathway to citizenship. It's just the Afghans that are not. Yeah, it's a good question. What's the percentage of people that speak reasonable English? It's really varied, and a lot of it depends on the population. So, I'll give an example. The Congolese community, we've resettled quite a few Congolese. I would say in general, most Congolese don't come with a lot of English skills. That tends to have very low English skills. The Afghans, a lot of them have English skills because they served with the US military. In fact, we just resettled a guy who speaks 7 languages, one of them being Hebrew, actually. So he speaks 7 languages. And some of our other populations, it kind of just really varies. I would say for some people that have been in long-term displacement, like our African populations who have been in refugee camps, say 14, 15, 16 years, a lot of them speak some basic English because they kind of get the sense like, I'm probably going to move to the United States. So they start studying a little bit in the camps. But in general, it can be very, very varied from like, I'm not even literate in my own language and don't read and write at all, to like, I'm speak 7 languages. Like it's really, really a broad spectrum. The US Refugee Resettlement Program does not have any requirements about who gets to come. And I think this is a good thing. When we set up our refugee resettlement program in the United States, we said it's for the most vulnerable. That doesn't mean, so that means that if you have a medical condition, that means when you get here, you can't work, you're still eligible to come. There are other countries that only allow people in that can work, that can care for themselves. The US isn't that way. It's about saving the world's most vulnerable people. And so we resettled, a few years ago, we resettled a grandma who was joining her grandkids. She was 101 years old when I picked her up at the airport, and she's now 104. And she swears her birthday is wrong. She's like, no, I'm 108. The government messed up. But yeah, I mean, she deserves to be here as much as anybody deserves to seek, safety, because that enriches her grandchildren's lives, right? Like I want my grandma to be where I am. And so the refugee resettlement program doesn't have any age restrictions or anything along those lines. So you don't have to speak English to come here. Anybody's welcome, as long as they pass the screenings. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
If you can give me the website you mentioned for the volunteering, I'd really appreciate that. But anyway, so thank you, Isa. So impactful. All right, I want to invite the brothers back up here, and we're going to move over to the Elenu, which is on page 587 of your prayer. Oh wait, sorry, Misha Barach first, right? Yeah, Misha Barach on 371 of your prayer books. It's our prayer for healing, and so of course we're thinking about all the Ukrainians who are in need of healing, and all the refugees who are in need of healing. And in our own community, we're thinking about Tina Mink, Chris Converse, Jennifer Eskridge, Ian Clift, David Tobias, Katie Flagel, Lindsay Raber, Micah Purdy, Cheryl Limbriani, Laura Allen, Susan Super, Mary Jo Robinson, Melba Cook, Emmy Webb, Stephen Lamp, Russell Krass, Bill Ross, Alan Friedman, Russ Nog, Ross Rumach, Norma Haas, Ray Ellis, Judy Cantor, Carol Revan, Diane Kaplan, Craig Paulus, Philip Kaufman, Nicole Neeson, Jane Anderson, Luis Mayer, Lillian Mayer, and Margie Bauman. Anyone who you are thinking of, please feel free to say their names out loud or in your hearts who are needed healing.
מי שברך אבותינו מקור הברכה לאמותינו. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha leavotenu. Bless those in need of Refuah Shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
And now we move to the Eleni, which you can find on page 587 of your prayer books. When we arrive there, I invite you to stand with us. May we gain wisdom in our lives, overflowing like a river with understanding. Love each of us for the peace we bring to others. May our deeds exceed our speech, and may we lift up our hands but to conquer fear and doubt and despair. Rise up with the sun, O God, over all humanity. Cause light to go forth over all the lands between the seas, and light up the universe with the joy of wholeness, of freedom, and of peace.
ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד
We now turn to the Mourner's Kaddish on page 598 of our prayer books. And in our own community, these are the yard sites we're mourning for this week. Estelle Alexander, Isadora Greenman, Jenny Josephson, Max Kerman, Sarah Lehman, Berta Rose, Carol Rubin, Ethel Rudolph, Amelia Stonecker, and Alice Wasserman. If there's someone who you are mourning for, please feel free to say their names out loud or in your hearts. Zikronam livracha, may the memories be for a blessing. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabba, be'elma divra chayote v'yamlik machute, b'chayechon uvyamechon uvchayedachol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru, amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarak Le'olam Ulamei Almaya. Yitbarak V'yishtabak V'yitpa'ar V'yipromam V'yitnase. V'yitadar V'itale V'talal Shemeru Kudusha Barichu. Le'elam Min Kol Birchata V'shirata. Tushbechata V'nechamata. Da'imiran Be'alma V'imru. Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya. V'chaim aleni v'akol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom b'imroma. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleni v'akol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, to which we say, Amen. You may be seated. Okay, announcements. So we have our Exploring the Liturgy class tomorrow at 9:30. And then after that at 10:30, we have our regular text study. And I'm sorry to say that I canceled Shabbat ski tomorrow. The conditions just don't look great for skiing. And I would hate for us Jews to get hurt on Shabbat trying to ski around. So anyway, we're not doing that. But I did release my new episode of my podcast. So that's available, of What Divines Us. And then we have no religious school on Sunday. We're out for winter or spring break. And then we have morning minion at 8 a.m. on Wednesday on our Zoom room. Am I forgetting anything? Is that it? Did I get it all? Yes. Okay, there we go. Those are announcements. All right. What are we doing for our closing melody? Okay, what page? 6:45 for our closing melody. 6:45? Yes. Okay. Got your way, sorry. So the bottom one, right? Yeah. Yeah. 6:45 on the bottom.
לא ייסגרו אל גויכם, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה, לא ייסגרו אל גויכם, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה, לא ייסגרו
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you, Mitra Brothers, for the music. And thank you, Isa, for being here as our guest speaker. I hope you guys have a great Shabbat. Be careful of those potholes out there. With the water, it's even harder to see them. So watch out. Don't let your car fall into one, okay?